Hi there, John here, and I just thought I'd give my thoughts on the possibility of this no deal with the EU and what's happening with it. And I wanted to put it into a broader perspective, really. It's obvious that the Conservative government is hopelessly divided, and they couldn't negotiate a piss up in a brewery. And so we're now being told about 60-40 no deal. I also think it's true that the European Union has no interest in negotiating a deal. So what they would prefer, I think, overall, is that Britain stays in the European Union. And that if we crash out of the EU with a no deal, that would be an example to countries like Italy, for example, who are now having a huge financial crisis and political crisis as the result of the Eurozone. It would say to them, look, this is what we can do to Britain, you better not leave. So, my ear itches. So, therefore, the question is, what will happen? Now, there's been loads of scare stories about what happens if we crash out on a no deal. My own sense of this, which could be wrong, is that there is no majority in Parliament for crashing out with a no deal. So therefore, I think what will probably happen is not that we will crash out with a no deal, but either we'll crash out with a very bad deal, or alternatively, we will, through negotiation, we will simply extend the deadline so that we will have an interim phase where we don't leave. We simply continue paying all the small fortune that we're paying, and that period is then extended for negotiations. And of course, the negotiations will never produce a deal because the EU has no interest in that. Now, I also think it's quite interesting to try and look at this from a slightly different perspective here, and that is that what is actually happening in the EU. And right at the heart of the European Union, there is a rotten core, a rotten cancer, if you like. And that cancer is called the Eurozone. The Eurozone has inflicted huge poverty on Cyprus, on Greece, on Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ireland. The Eurozone is probably only good for one country in there, and that is Germany. Right now, there's a huge political crisis brewing in Italy, where because of years of no or negative growth, because the economy is doing very, very badly overall. There have been bank crashes, and the EU they forced bail-ins in Cyprus as an experiment to see whether they could. And a bail-in is different from a bailout. A bailout is where the European Central Bank or the Bank of England or the Federal Reserve in America produce lots of funny money through quantitative easing and flood the financial system so that bondholders, etc., don't lose What the EU did as an experiment, the canary in the mine, was that they forced bail-ins in Cyprus just to see whether they could get away with it, and they got away with it. And then, of course, the EU crushed the Greek democracy, and they forced a totally phony extend and pretend bail out program that basically didn't bail out Greece, it didn't bail out the Greek banks, it bailed out the German banks who lent huge amounts of money to Greece. It was a German bailout, not a Greek bailout. And of course, the poverty in Greece, as a direct result of the Eurozone, is crushing. There is now a political crisis group brewing in Italy. When the Italian president overruled one of the nominations for it to be chancellor from one of the Eurosceptic parties, the Five Star and I can't remember the name of the other party now, but they overruled it partly, at least, because this new chancellor was proposing a parallel currency system to rival the euro. It's aimed at alleviating poverty and allowing some expansion in the Italian economy. And my understanding is that the Italian government is proposing an anti-austerity budget that flies in the face of German-imposed and EU-imposed austerity. There's going to be a huge, I believe, political crisis to accompany the economic crisis. And things are not good in Spain either. So what I suspect will happen is that the British exit from the European Union will be fudged. We won't actually leave. We will either have a bad deal which the May government will swallow, or we will have an extended negotiating time. And in the meantime, we also need to keep an eye on what is happening in Europe, what is happening in the Eurozone, and the economic crisis that is engulfing the Eurozone. President Macron, he did a sort of super a super swizz on the French people, and of course, French people did not want to vote for the neo-Nazi alternative. So, however, even his very modest economic reforms have been, in terms of the Eurozone, have been overruled by Germany. So it's not, everybody is saying, oh, no deal, it's going to be awful, it's going to be awful. There's no majority in Parliament for a no deal. There isn't. In which case, I suspect the EU want to continue getting our money. The EU want to preserve the unity of the EU, and they would rather get our money than not. And if the price of getting our money is an extended negotiating period, then I think that that's probably what they will do. And then it remains to be seen what happens to the EU while we're in that transition phase, or we're in that extended negotiating phase. The EU will continue, I suspect, to go downhill, with the Eurozone being the cancer at the heart of the EU. And the EU, will either have to reform, or it's going to just slowly crumble like the old Soviet Union, the old Eastern Bloc countries. And nobody quite knows how long that's going to take. But the France, they had a lucky escape. Italy have now got a very Eurosceptic government that's going to try and force through an anti-austerity budget. I support that. I fully support an anti-austerity budget, but Merkel will not allow it under any circumstances. And There's also huge capital flows apparently coming out of Italy into places like Germany, with the ECB propping up Italian banks by putting money back in. That is also an economic lever to actually say to the Italian government, you can't do the anti-austerity budget. If you do, we'll cut off your funding. We will allow the banks to crumble and crash and cause even more poverty in your country, because they will have bail-ins, not bailouts. So it's looking very dodgy, very dangerous, and probably the best solution, a temporary solution for Great Britain, for the United Kingdom, is a fudge in which we perhaps have a Norway solution and we bide our time and just see what happens. Anyway, that's my view on this, for what it's worth. I think there's a whole load of hot air about no deal. I don't think it's going to happen. We're not going to crash out with no deal. We'll probably stay put and have an extended negotiating period. And of course, what will happen to the Theresa May government, I don't know. What will happen to Labour? Labour are on self-destruct as usual, with the Blairites attacking Jeremy Corbyn for anti-Semitism. I just don't believe he's anti-Semite. I just don't believe it. They'd rather have a Tory government than Jeremy Corbyn government, quite frankly. And I'm not saying that there isn't anti-Semitism in the party, but this relentless attack is, I think the primary aim is not to root out anti-Semitism. The primary aim is to stop Jeremy Corbyn from becoming Prime Minister. And I personally would like to see a Corbyn-led government in this country. So that's my views, for what it's worth, and we'll see whether I'm right. All right, thanks for listening, if you have.